Oh no, not this thing again. Meh, the last video of the year and it's on this oddball car that's in our test fleet. And I need to close the books on this successful but failed project. So, where to begin? Well, I guess I should introduce you to this car. It's a 2000 Honda Insight gasoline-electric hybrid. Actually, this car was built in November 1999, and it's one of the first 50 that were imported into the United States. So, it's the first generation of the first generation. Yeah, the early version of this car is slightly different than the later versions of the first gen. I hope that's confusing, because it is confusing when doing research on these things. You know, at first glance, this may look like a crappy and cheaply made mass-produced econobox. But in reality, this was an expensive car when it was new, and it was made in very, very limited numbers. Nearly everything on this car is unique, and even though it's a Honda, it doesn't have a lot in common with other Hondas of the era. I believe something like 17,000 of these goofy-looking cars were built during the 5-year production run, so not very many were made, and not very many are left. I speculate that for each Honda Insight that's still on the road, well, 3 less fortunate Honda Insights had to be parted out in order to keep a car like this in running condition. Anyway, back in March of this year, I rescued this car from certain demise. You see, this car was suffering from electrical problems, and it took a fair amount of troubleshooting to figure out the root cause of a handful of issues. But in the end, I had a fully functional first-gen Honda Insight, which is sort of a problem. Since this car was fully functional, I just couldn't bring myself to do anything evil to the car. Now, most of the viewers are familiar with the other Honda Insight we have on this channel, and that one's a bit more exciting because it's been fitted with a 719cc 3-cylinder supercharged diesel engine. That, of course, is a completely different project. On the other hand, this car is 100% stock with the exception of a homemade grid charger that's been fitted. Anyway, I never drove a normal Honda Insight before, so we added this newly acquired Honda to our test fleet so it could be studied. Now, right off the bat, I have to confess, I have zero interest in the hybrid stuff. Even though the hybrid stuff was fully functional, that was actually the least interesting thing about this car. Actually, it was somewhat annoying. Anyway, the good thing about the hybrid system on this car is it can be shut off and the car can be driven normally, just like any other gasoline car. And that's great, because the way this car is used, well, the hybrid stuff doesn't make much of a difference anyway. This car is driven a few times a week into Wichita to pick up packages, and it's all expressway driving with only a mile or two of surface streets. I've driven the exact same route for close to 9 months now, with the hybrid stuff active and with the hybrid stuff shut off. The only time I noticed a difference was on hot days with the air conditioning on. Well, the electric motor definitely helps the car accelerate a bit better. The thing I found most interesting about this car is the fact that it's extremely difficult to drive. I fully admit that I might not be the right person for a car like this. Personally, I like a car that has a reasonable amount of power, and this car has very little power to spare. I found it hard to believe that Honda would build a car like this for the American market, and perhaps that's the reason why not so many of these were sold. You know, at first, I actually thought there might be something wrong with the engine. Actually, there was one minor issue with the engine, and that was the wideband oxygen sensor was throwing a code every week. So I sourced a new sensor. Now, when I had the old wideband sensor out, I did check the back pressure on the exhaust system just to confirm that both catalytic converters were not plugged. And it turns out both converters were fine. So, no issues with a restricted exhaust system. With the wideband sensor and a fresh air filter installed, I decided to transfer the Bridgestone low rolling resistance RE92 tires from the diesel Honda to this car. At this point, the car was 100% back to factory specifications. The average fuel economy per tank was between 52 and 53 miles to the US gallon, which ain't bad considering I drive the car at 70 plus miles per hour. But here's the catch. In order to get the fuel economy up into the 50s, you have to drive this thing in 4th gear. Yep, using 5th gear, the fuel economy will actually drop down into the high 40s. Keep in mind, I drove this thing for 9 months and I kept a logbook on what I did for each fresh tank of fuel, and 4th gear gets the best fuel economy. Now, there were rare occasions when I had a tailwind, and in those cases, 5th gear was helpful. So I couldn't help but wonder if there was something else wrong with the car. I just can't get over how slow this car is, and the engine runs fine, but it does vibrate quite a bit. So just for fun, I popped the cam cover off and had a look. The lash on all the rocker arms except for one were in spec. The good news is the rocker arms are adjustable, and it was easy to adjust the slightly loose arm back to factory specifications. Now, on the Insight forum, there's mention of a pin that's used to locate the timing chain sprocket to the camshaft. Apparently, this pin can deform and shear, causing massive engine damage. On this engine, the pin was in perfect condition, so that removed any suspicions that the camshaft timing might be slightly off. Now, on the cam cover, you'll notice that it says B-plug. Yep, that's one of those crazy things Honda did on these engines to allegedly help with the lean burn system to operate more efficiently. So B-plug means that the engine uses a special index spark plug marked with the letter B. Generic plugs can be used, and I've tried them just for giggles, but the Honda people say for best performance, you need to use the indexed plugs. Now, for this 3-cylinder engine, it costs over $70 for 3 spark plugs, if you include shipping. On the other hand, for 3 generic spark plugs, you're looking at about $12 for the whole lot. I paid the $70 for the correct spark plugs, but I'm not sure it was worth it. While I had the plugs out, I did take a look at the compression on each cylinder. Compression testing is a bit odd for this engine, and I did it completely wrong. As you may have heard, the engine sounded weird, and that's because I used the IMA starter to crank the engine over. When you use the IMA to crank the engine over for compression tests, well, the numbers are going to be a lot higher than normal. I did eventually do the compression test again the right way, and the numbers were good on each cylinder. So basically, the engine's in perfect condition, and the car was engineered to be slow. Jimmy don't like that. Oh well. Now, I did have a look at the EGR system and spent a lot of time experimenting with it, but in the end, the car runs best with the EGR installed and operating as originally engineered. So during the hotter parts of the summer, the nickel metal hybrid battery finally started giving me trouble. Now on this car, the battery feature can be shut off and the car can still be driven normally. So having troubles with the battery is not a death sentence. Anyway, this car did come with an extra battery pack, so I spent about a week going through the extra battery pack, checking out each of the cells to confirm the spare pack was in good condition. Here's a quick tip. Using an engine hoist to pull and replace the battery pack makes this job so much easier. Now, with the fiasco of the battery pack failing, I wanted to make sure that the rebuilt battery pack would survive, and I went ahead and built a homemade grid charger in order to keep the battery healthy. I use the grid charger for maintenance, and I don't use it to actually charge the battery. Since this car is always driven on the expressway, well, the battery is always fully charged. However, about once a month now, I discharge the battery through this light bulb, and then I'll slow charge the battery back up to full potential. Seems to work. So despite driving this car for 9 months and doing countless experiments on it, I never found a way to make the car faster or a way to improve the fuel economy. You know, it's not fair to second guess Honda's decision to use the awkward transmission ratios on this car, because I might not be the target consumer this car was meant for. Although I have talked to other owners of the first-gen Honda Insights, and it seems nobody's happy with the way the 5-speed transmission is set up. Actually, there's some clever hacks out there where the transmission ratios can be changed for better overall performance, but unfortunately the parts for these type of mods are hard to find. Now, here's an interesting and bizarre fact about the first-gen Honda Insight. When this car was new, cruise control was not an option. You see, cruise control was a forbidden luxury. Now, aftermarket cruise controls were available at the time, but Honda never officially offered cruise control on this car. I speculate that part of owning and driving one of these first-gen cars was you were expected to actually drive the car if it were a video game. Now, in order to achieve high score, aka best fuel economy, you had to pay attention to everything. While cruise control may actually help with the fuel economy on cars with larger engines, I think on this car, cruise control would affect the fuel economy in a negative way. You see, the little engine just doesn't have any extra power, and trying to maintain constant speed with the lean burn feature kicking in and out is something that no cruise control at the time could sort out. Nope, no cruise for you. If you want to drive a Honda Insight, then you must drive the car the way Honda built it. Otherwise, get a Honda Civic. And yes, cruise controls were available on the Civics. So this video is being released on the last day of 2024 because I need to close the books on this project. After driving this car for 9 months and collecting a ton of data and doing countless experiments off camera, I just don't think this car can be improved other than experimenting with the transmission gear ratios. Now here's one more interesting fact about this car. It's 25 years old. Now that's a quarter of a century in dog years. The car has 265,000 miles on it, so basically it's traveled around this planet 10.5 times. When this car hit the market back in the day, it was likely one of the most technically complex cars on the road. Well, guess what? It's still running and driving, and likely will continue to run and drive for many, many more years. Good luck getting a Ford, a GM, a Chrysler Stellantis, a Nissan, a Subaru, and even some Toyotas that last half as long. I think most of the overpriced and poorly engineered crap that's on the market these days is built to fail right when the warranty runs out. Now, just to be fair, likely the only reason this car has survived as long as it has is because it's made entirely out of aluminum and hasn't decomposed into iron dust like most Hondas do. Even though I don't particularly like this car, I think I'm going to keep it. Chances are it's going to be a long while before something better comes along. Well, that's the story of the little Honda. It's been a disappointing car because of the transmission ratios. However, everything else about the car is just meh. See you next time.
We said meh. M-E-H. Meh.